Good evening. Thanks for your welcome. Beautiful poetry tonight. That was lovely. Well, this is a song with a story in it, as all my songs have. Thank you. And I wrote this one day when I was traveling on a train, and I was realizing that things weren't really as I wished that they would be. And it felt kind of broken. Maybe one of those days when I'm dreaming of a fresh start. And this is the story of that day and how something came back to my mind that really kind of turned that day and had already turned my life upside down. The song's called Train. Train rattles and sings, sighs and bounces across the edge of town. Brakes squeal and whine, purr and hiss as we pull into the dirty station. Things weigh heavy on my mind as I think how times have changed. As I think how times have changed. Speaker coughs and splutters, hums and crackles as we move away, as we move away. But then I think of what you said to me. Come to me and I will give you rest. I will give you rest. Come to me. Come to me, come to me, and I will give you rest. And the trees wave and flutter, bend and rustle as we rush. As we rush by, as we rush by. Come to me, come to me, come to me, and I will give you rest. I will give you rest. There goes the train.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andy. And we're going to be hearing a few more pieces from Andy as we explore this topic tonight. What if a fresh start is possible? Back in 2013, a PR executive by the name of Justine Sacco was flying from New York to Cape Town via London. While she spent a few hours browsing the shops in London's Heathrow Airport, she took to Twitter, as it was called back then, to observe what she was doing and to pass on some jokes to her 170 followers. She then got onto the second plane and she took off and spent a blissful night heading towards Cape Town, unaware of the fact that someone had spotted one of her tweets and had construed what she had said as racist. This then got retweeted and retweeted, and by the time Justine Sacco landed on a summer's morning in Cape Town. She was the number one trending topic in the world. She had lost her job, she had death threats, and she was not going to be able to get another job for a number of years. It was the first example, or maybe very prominent example, of what we sometimes call public shaming. And it's retold in this book by the journalist John Ronson, So You've Been Publicly Shamed. He recounts a number of stories of people like Justine Sacco, whose lives have been ended, as it were, by one joke that went wrong, one mistake. And he asks the question, what's happening in our society when you get cancelled for getting one thing wrong? Well, how do we feel about public shaming or cancel culture or whatever we want to call it? I guess perhaps we feel a bit conflicted, don't we? Because on the one hand, racism is wrong, and it is right that we are appalled at such things. But equally, is there no hope for those who get it wrong? Is redemption impossible? Is forgiveness too far away? Is there possibility for a fresh start? And what about when I get it wrong? Maybe not so publicly. Is there a fresh start for me? Well, that's the question we're going to be thinking about this evening. And as I said, to help us think about that, Andy's going to be singing a couple more songs through the evening. So I'm going to hand back to Andy to sing another one now with a story.
I wonder what your favourite film is. One of my favourite films is called Another Earth. And right at the beginning of the film, I'm not spoiling it by telling you this, there's this girl and she's kind of driving home in her Jeep and she's watching out of the window some strange astronomical phenomenon going on there. And as she's staring at it, she drives into another family and it looks like she's just kind of destroyed the whole family. And this girl, well, she heads off to prison. She'd been drinking a bit, so they blamed it on that. And as she went through prison, she was thinking, when I come out, I'm going to be free of this burden, you know. And yet when she came out, she still feels this kind of burden and longing that someone would lift this away. In fact, I'd love you to see the trailer to the film. I'll tell you a bit more in just a moment. Here it comes. So the wild science fiction idea is that maybe there's another her out there, and the other her hasn't done the things that have defined her life to be a broken life, a life that she can't lift the burden off her own shoulders. And as I watched the film, I was so moved. I was thinking, why am I so moved about this? And I thought, well, I know why. It's because I've got the same longing. If only I could have a fresh start. If only there was a way that the burdens that I carry could be lifted off my shoulders. Is there a place where even I could be forgiven? And it was that inspired this song. It's called A Place. Is there a place where I could be forgiven? Is there a place where I could be free? Is there a place of no condemnation? Is there a place for someone like me? Is there a way my wrong could be passed over? Is there a way to lose it in the deepest sea? Is there a way that I could touch heaven? Or is there a way that heaven could come to me? I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, whispers to me. I hear your voice and it echoes in my soul. I hear the voice of loving liberation. I hear the voice of the one who waits to set me free. I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, I hear your voice, and it whispers to me.
The great song, a great film worth watching if you've not seen that one, which you probably haven't actually because it's not the most well known. But it raises that interesting question, is a fresh start possible? One social commentator reflecting on the culture in which we find ourselves in the West today said the problem with the world which we live in today is that we've maintained or kept one aspect from the Christian faith, the idea of sin and judgment, but we've lost another, the idea of forgiveness. And I think there's something quite profound in that. We're aware that people can step out of line and get it wrong, and we're aware that there is something to be paid when people do so. But is there anything like forgiveness? The late Queen Elizabeth, speaking in one of her Christmas Day addresses to the nation, said, "Forgiveness lies at the heart of the Christian faith." And actually that reminds us of the symbol also that lies at the heart of the Christian faith, the symbol of the cross, which may be familiar to us, of course, but actually because of its familiarity, we lose something of the shocking offense of it because, of course, the cross was a symbol of execution. And yet at the heart of the Christian story is this claim that somehow through this event of Jesus' crucifixion, there is this offer of this thing called forgiveness. So tonight, I'd just love for a few minutes to look at the account of it in this book that's on your tables. If you could pick up those Mark books that are on your tables. We've been tracking through this over the course of the week. This is one of the biographical accounts of the life of Jesus. We've been looking at some of the incidents in it, and by the way, this is free for you to take away if you've not got one already. But tonight, I want us just to look at a section of the description of Jesus' death by crucifixion. It's a much longer section that we won't read the whole thing. Interestingly, actually, the whole detail of his death, events surrounding his death, take up about a third of the book, which is strange, isn't it, for a biography? Normally, someone's death is the footnote in the last paragraph, not the main thing. And yet, it seems that from what the authors of the Gospels, that's what we call the biographers of Jesus' death was so important, it took a prominent place. And I want to read verse from page 42 down towards the end, where it's verse 33, the small number 33. By this point, Jesus has been arrested, he's been stripped, he's been mocked, he's been dressed up as a pretend king and tortured and beaten. He's been taken outside of the city of Jerusalem. He's been nailed to a Roman cross alongside two criminals to his left and right. And then we pick up the story at midday in verse 33. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. And at 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of those standing near heard this. They said, "Listen, he's calling Elijah." Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar and put it on a staff and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down," he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God. We'll stop there. It's a story of an event, in one sense, that happened regularly. Crucifixion was a brutal form of execution that would have happened thousands of times in the Roman Empire. But there was something about this one that seemed to stand out and has stood out down through history, why we're thinking about it this evening. Mel Gibson once directed a film that you might have seen, The Passion of the Christ, depicting in all its gory detail the events of Jesus' crucifixion. And the Pope at the time was asked to comment about it, and he came out with a great soundbite. He said, "It is as it was. It is as it was." And there was something in that. We were confronted with the brutality of crucifixion. But actually, if I can disagree with the Pope, and that's allowed, I might want to suggest that in one sense it's not quite what it was. Because actually what the Bible seems to indicate is that there was a deeper level to what Jesus was suffering than simply the physical stuff that happened and would have happened to others as they would have been crucified. And actually Mark, the author of this biography, pulls out 3 details that give us a kind of clue as to this deeper level of what's going on. The first is this darkness. Notice that in verse 33. At noon, the point in the day when the sun should be at its brightest, everything goes dark for 3 hours. We know that's not a solar eclipse, by the way, because of the duration, and also because this event happened at Passover. And Passover would have taken place at full moon. And of course, a solar eclipse can't happen at that point in the month. But it's also interesting that a later Roman historian, a guy called Thallus, seems to comment about this supernatural darkness at the time. So there's darkness. And then in verse 34, we read what Jesus cries, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani." Mark keeps the original language, and he interprets it, my God, why have you forsaken me?" What's going on there? Well, darkness in the Bible is a picture, a symbol of actually God's absence and God's judgments and God's anger. And as the darkness falls, Jesus cries out to God the Father, "Why have you forsaken me?" Showing that he seems to be separated, as if God is absent from him on the cross. You see, it would seem that what's happening is that God's anger is being represented, and it seems to be falling on Jesus. Try and illustrate that. When I was a kid, I used to love playing with magnifying glasses. Anyone love playing with magnifying glasses? I discovered there were great things you could do with magnifying glasses. Magnifying glasses made small things bigger, but they also made hot things hotter. And if you got a magnifying glass on a sunny day, you could have all sorts of fun with paper or the garden fence or your sister's forehead. You could do lots of things with a magnifying glass because you would take, as it were, all the rays of the sun and you would focus it down onto one point with all of its intense heat. Yet incredibly, what the Bible seems to say is that all of the heat of God's righteous anger and judgment at all of the wrong and evil of our world was being focused down on his son, on Jesus. Jesus was somehow absorbing all of that darkness of judgments in our place. And then after Jesus dies, we see another detail, verse 38. The scene moves from this hill outside of Jerusalem back into the city to the temple. And in the temple in Jerusalem, there was a kind of inner part which was symbolic of God's presence on earth. And before that, there was a massive curtain. And that curtain symbolized basically a massive no entry sign into the presence of God. People were reminded every time they went to the temple that they couldn't come near to God because they were not right and God was perfect. And this curtain hung there as a reminder of their imperfection and their distance from this God. And yet what do we see in verse 38? As Jesus cries out his final breath, this curtain is torn in two, not from bottom to top by some rogue priest, but from top to bottom. Symbolic of this no entry sign being done away with, this access that's now made possible into the very heart and presence of God. And what it's showing is that somehow through what Jesus is doing in his death on the cross, there is a way being made open so that we can now have access into the very heart and throne room of heaven, that we can have a way to be made right with God. There was something different about Jesus' death to anyone else's, which is why, interestingly, this centurion who was standing at the cross and had probably seen hundreds of crucifixions remarks in verse 39, surely this man was the Son of God. You see, there was something different about Jesus' death to anyone else's. And Mark says it's the most important thing we could ever grasp. But of course, that maybe raises lots of questions in our minds about what that means for us and for the world and how we interpret that. And I want to raise some of those questions in a moment. But before I do, I'm going to ask Andy to sing us another song. Thanks, Andy.
I wrote this song in some little cafe in South London. I'm from that way. Anyone down there? Anyone from down there? One or two? Yeah, hi. And I was reading an ancient bit of poetry as I was writing this, and it spoke of this one who would come, who would bring people out of darkness. And somebody leant over the bar and said, "What are you doing?" I said, I'm just reading about this ruler who will come, who will take away the brokenness and take away the darkness. And she said, "Oh, I just wish somebody like that would come." And we ended up talking along a similar theme that we're talking tonight about Jesus. And this song, it's called Prince of Peace. And we see him with scars in his hands and his feet. And we realize something of the purpose that he went to that cross for. There's a whispering, rumors in the west and in the east, about some future feast, when all that's bitter becomes sweet. There's a growing song that echoes in the bars and in the streets. It's a rhythm for the greatest to the least. They say it's something about a Prince of Peace. And for us, walking in darkness, there's a dawning light. Yeah, for us, walking in darkness, it's breaking bright. Some say a day will come, secret, silent as a thief, but a moment of all glory and relief, when time itself is complete, when the clamoring, violence, pain, and wars are ceased, the shackled and the broken are released. They say it's something about a Prince of Peace. And for us, walking in darkness, there's a dawning light. Yeah, for us, walking in darkness, it's breaking bright. For to us, a child is born. To us, a son is given. To us, the King has come, and he'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, the Prince of Peace. He'll be called the Prince of Peace. Now a trumpet sounds, a resurrection day for those who sleep. And some are filled with joy, but others weep. They say it's something about a Prince of Peace. And from where I stand, I see the King of Glory take his seat. But there's scars upon his hands and on his feet. They say it's something about a Prince of Peace. And for us, walking in darkness, there's a dawning light. Yeah, for us, walking in darkness, it's breaking bright. For to us, a child is born. To us, a son is given to us. The king has come, and he'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, the Prince of Peace. He'll be called the Prince of Peace. He'll be called the Prince of Peace.
Thanks so much, Andy. So we're saying there is the possibility of a fresh start. It comes through this maybe surprising route of the death of Jesus on the cross. But that raises questions. And so in the final part this evening, I just want to look at some of the questions that we might have as we reflect on this. 4 questions. Firstly, do I need a fresh start? It's possible, isn't it, to look at someone like Justine Sacco and think, well, she obviously needed a fresh start. And possibly to look at many other people out there and to see that, yeah, forgiveness might be a great thing for those who've really blown it. But have I? Do I need a fresh start? And I guess it's easy, isn't it, to divide the world into kind of 2 groups of people in our minds. The bad people who've blown it and need forgiveness, and the good people who haven't and don't. And we often like to obviously put ourselves in the second category. But what if life isn't quite so simple and black and white as that? I don't know if you've come across Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He's written a credible book, The Gulag Archipelago. If you've got a spare few weeks to read it in the summer, you can read it. It's a massive book recounting his experience in the Soviet version of the concentration camp, the Gulag. And as he recounts the atrocities that he experienced at the hands of the prison guards in that Siberian camp, he thinks about how easy it would be to simply see the problems of the world as out there in the lives of the people tormenting him. But then he says this, very honestly. He says, let the reader who expects this book to be a political expose slam its covers shut right now. If only it were all so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who's willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? Very honest and sobering admission from someone who could have very easily just pointed the finger, and yet he recognized that the problem was not just in the heart of others, but in his own heart too. The dividing line between good and evil, cutting down the center of every human heart. Because the reality is, all of us are capable of good, but all of us are capable of the opposite, aren't we? All of us are a mixture of both, and none of us are quite the people that we should be. And so if we were to cancel all those who've blown it, where would we stop? Because to some degree and in some way, and perhaps in a less public way, we all have at times. But it's kind of hard to admit that, isn't it? Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for economic theory, and for his work in economic theory. And he, in the book, examines a number of psychological experiments, particularly one that was very interesting, I won't go into the details of, looking at how we often have a more positive view of human nature than is perhaps realistic. And he concluded by saying, changing one's mind about human nature is hard work. Changing one's mind for the worse about oneself is even harder. Very honest, isn't it? We like to think that people are basically good, but we're continually confronted by the fact they're not, and we find it hard to admit that maybe we also are part of the problem. Or Martin Lewis, apparently he's the most trusted guy in Britain. Martin Lewis, moneysavingexpert.com. He did an interesting poll back on, as I say, Twitter as it was back then, asking people basically whether they thought that other people were generally good, and then another one asking whether people thought that they were generally good. And this is what he concluded after he got the results back. He said, so far in this poll, 95% of people believe they are, quote, a decent and generally honest person. Yet only 16% of people in my earlier poll believe that over 90% of other people are. So he concludes, either we're overinflating our own goodness or underappreciating it in others. We often like to think of ourselves perhaps better than we are. And so therefore we can think, well, a fresh start, that's what other people need, isn't it? But what if it's what we need? I remember once getting on a flight to fly up to Edinburgh. I was speaking at some events up there. And you know when you go through security at an airport, does anyone get a little bit nervous going through security? You've got nothing to be nervous about. But anyway, going through security, and I put my bag on the belt. I walked through to the other side, and I waited for my bag. It didn't come through for a while. And then eventually, when it did, the person came over, and they said, we're going to have to search your bag. And so I said, that's fine. And so they took my bag, and they started taking things out of my bag and putting it on this table. And the first thing out of my bag was my Bible. So I was tempted to feel quite self-righteous at this point. She placed it on the table. But then the second item out of my bag was a bit more embarrassing. It was the biography of Simon Cowell. And I just bought it in W.H. Smith's, and it went next to the Bible, no change, no expression. And then she started taking a few other things, a few other books, bits of paper. She kind of got halfway down my backpack, and I suddenly thought to myself, I can't remember what's at the bottom of my bag, actually. My bag's a bit like a black hole. Things go in, and they never come out. Anyone else have a bag like that? And as I'm wondering about this, she pulls out this banana peel that's been in there for a couple of weeks, and she places it on the table, and then there's an apple core on the table. There's a pair of my worn underpants on the table. It's all there, and all the time people are kind of walking by, looking at the table and looking at me, and they're kind of sniggering to themselves, as you are now. And I'm just I wish the ground could just open up and swallow me alive. It's so embarrassing. At the end, she found this screwdriver, which she allowed me to keep anyway, but was obviously the offending item. And then she said, I will let you pack your own bag. And I thought, thanks very much. You don't want to touch my pants more than once. But as I was kind of throwing most of it into the nearby bin, I was thinking to myself, that was embarrassing. But then I thought to myself, what if, though, that were to happen, not just with my bag, but with my life? Or your life? What if all the contents of your life, my life, were put out on display tonight? All the things we've ever done, and ever said, and ever thought. How would we feel? There would be some things on the table that I'd be really proud about. Maybe some of my charitable work, some of my exam results, some of my sporting, no sporting achievements. But there'd be some things that, rightly, we could be proud of. But I bet for all of us, there'd be other things that we'd be utterly ashamed of, wouldn't we? And maybe it never made it to X or Instagram, and we never got publicly cancelled for it. But gosh, if it was known. Is a fresh start possible? Well, it better be, because we all need one, don't we, actually, if we're really honest. If we're really honest, we can't just point the finger. None of us are the people we should be. But here's another question we might want to ask, and it's this. Well, can't God just forgive? I mean, it seems a bit of a strange way to go about offering forgiveness to the world, coming into it, getting oneself crucified on a cross. I mean, shouldn't God just, if he's God, just forgive us? Many people have said things like that, and they found the idea of Jesus' death kind of almost offensive, weird. And as I said actually in the Q&A to one of the other talks, the first thing to say is that no one just forgives, do they? If you've ever been really hurt by someone, forgiveness is hard. Partly because when you forgive someone, you absorb in yourself the pain that you would want to pay back upon the other person. And we see something of that in the cross as Jesus absorbs the pain and the justice and the judgment that we deserve. But also, it's worth remembering that there's a difference between forgiveness and tolerance. We talk a lot about tolerance in our society, don't we? And tolerance, by the way, is a good thing. I'm not suggesting it's anything other than that. And I'd also suggest it's part of the fruit of the Christian revolution in the world in which we live. But it only goes so far. And I would suggest forgiveness is something deeper than that. What is the difference? Well, again, the difference came home to me in, again, a rather amusing moments in my life. Well, perhaps you'll find it amusing. I didn't find it much amusing at the time. Years ago, I was working down in the south of England in a town called Bournemouth for a church. And I'd been preaching one Sunday morning, and this older lady in the church, she came up to me and she said, Michael, we don't think your clothes are very well ironed. And I said, that's because my clothes aren't ironed. Ironing, in my mind back then and still today, is a complete waste of time. And so I said, well, they aren't. And she says, well, I would like to do your ironing for you. And I was not quite sure how to kind of respond to this invitation. So I said, well, I'm fine. So the following week, she saw me again and she said, please, let me do your ironing for you. I said, no, I'm fine. And the next week she said it again, and I thought the only way I can get her off my case is to actually let her do my ironing. I did think later that I could have just done my own, but that didn't occur to me at the time. So we had this kind of arrangement where I would do my washing, I would then drive across town, I would deliver my washed but unironed clothes to this lady, and then she would iron them, and then the next day or 2 days later I'd drive across town, I'd pick them up and I'd bring them home. And this has been happening for a few weeks. Anyway, there's one particular week I dropped off my clothes. I'd been really busy, so I hadn't had the time to go and pick them up. So she phoned me up and she says, don't worry, Michael, I'll just drop them in the church office. You can pick them up when you're in tomorrow. So I thought, oh, thanks. So anyway, that was Tuesday. Next day was Wednesday. It was my day off. So I didn't actually get into the office until Thursday, by which time I actually kind of needed some new clothes. So I went into the office. I looked for my clothes, couldn't find them. So I went downstairs, spoke to the secretary, and I said, have you seen my clothes? She's like, why would I have seen your clothes? So I had to explain this little arrangement that had been going on. She found this very amusing. And she said, well, I haven't seen them. So anyway, so I phone her up and I say, the clothes, when you dropped them off, where did you leave them? And she says, oh, I left them with Muriel. Now, that means nothing to you, but it started to get me a little bit worried because Muriel was the lady in our church who at the time used to run the outreach to homeless people. And they had a meeting every Wednesday in the church. And so I go down and I speak to Muriel and I say to Muriel, have you seen my clothes? They got dropped off on Tuesday. And there was this kind of horrible moment when the kind of metaphorical penny dropped in Muriel's mind. And she realized what had happened. And I, looking at her face, realized what had happened. She said, well, you better come and have a look. So we walked through to the storeroom where all the clothes were kept for being given away. And the only items of my clothes that hadn't been given away were my pajamas and a T-shirt that was obviously, so bad that no one wanted it. Everything else had been given away. I was walking around town for the next few weeks, meeting people who were wearing my clothes. And I kind of wanted to ask for them back, but then it looks a bit awkward if you're going up to someone on the street asking for their jumper, so I didn't. But I was kind of upset at this point because all my clothes have now been given away and I have nothing left. So I say to Muriel, I'm like, why did you give away my clothes? And she says, well, it's Barbara's fault, the lady who had done the ironing. She said she shouldn't have given them to me. She knows that I run this and so on. So I phone up Barbara and I say, Barbara, why did you give Muriel my clothes? What did you do? She said, well, it's Muriel's fault. She shouldn't have given them away. I told her it was for you. And so Muriel blamed Barbara and Barbara blamed Muriel. And eventually I'm on the phone again to Barbara. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the point where I should just say, well, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It's okay. But I couldn't. I was so upset. I just couldn't say it. And so I'm thinking, well, what should I say? And I couldn't think of anything to say. So I just put the phone down. But then I felt really bad because I was like, oh, she had me doing my ironing. And so I phoned up my friend, Stephen. I say to Stephen, what had happened, and he found it quite funny too. But then I'm when he stopped laughing, I'm like, Stephen, but what should I have said? Because she said that she was sorry, and I felt like I should say it was okay, but I couldn't say it was okay because I didn't feel it was okay, and I didn't know what to say. And I'll never forget what Stephen said. He said, well, what you could have said was, I forgive you. And suddenly I, for the first time perhaps, realized the difference between tolerance and forgiveness. Tolerance is when you say to someone, it's okay. And you can kind of say that to people when it's not too big a deal. And by the way, actually giving away someone's clothes isn't that big a deal at the end of the day, is it? But forgiveness is not when you say, it's okay. In fact, forgiveness is saying, it's not okay, but I'm not going to make you pay. In other words, I'm going to pay to put it right. And that's important because actually the Bible never ever says that God tolerates us. The Bible doesn't say that, when God looks at the world, he says, well, it's all okay, because it's not, is it? There's so much in our world that's not okay. And when God looks at our lives, he doesn't just say, well, it's all okay, because if we're honest, there's stuff in our lives that are not okay. But wonderfully, although the Bible says God doesn't tolerate us, it does say that through Jesus he's willing to forgive us. In other words, God looks at our lives and he says, it's not okay, but I'm not going to make you pay because I've already paid. And he did it through Jesus' death on the cross. He pays so that we don't have to. Because forgiveness isn't tolerance. God doesn't tolerate us, but he is willing to forgive us. And that's so important to remember, isn't it? God doesn't look at our lives and our world and say it's okay, because it's not okay. But he is willing to say that we don't have to pay. That's great news. The third question, briefly. You might say, well, okay, but isn't forgiveness a bit risky? Like, if there's this God that can look at all of the mess of this world and be willing to wipe it clean, isn't that a bit risky? I mean, wouldn't people just start doing what they like if I know that I can just kind of come to God and be forgiven? Surely it would be better to kind of threaten them with some form of judgment to try and make them obey. And if you're asking that question, in a sense, that's great, because you're starting to realize how radical and different the heart of the Christian story is to the heart of every religious system. Because religious systems normally give us rules to live by and threaten us judgment if we don't. And yet at the heart of the Christian story is a God who loves us and takes the judgment we deserve so we don't have to. But actually what the Bible says is discovering that forgiveness isn't a license to go on doing what we want. But actually, that forgiveness is the gateway to a new life where we can start to live as we were created to. Forgiveness is actually the gateway to a transformed life. And the sign that someone's really experienced forgiveness is actually that their life is different as a result. I remember meeting a guy called Tom Tarrance, actually not far from here, in an office in Oxford a few years ago. But Tom was a fascinating guy. Back in the 1960s, an elderly man now, he was one of the most wanted people in America. He was like in the top 10 most wanted. When the civil rights movement was happening, Tom was actively opposing the civil rights movements. He's what we'd call a white supremacist. He was a terrorist. He had been setting out to kill people. He planted bombs. And he was imprisoned eventually. Not until he had been captured twice and shot and left for dead. He's imprisoned. He escapes. He gets captured and shot a second time. He gets imprisoned. He's put in solitary confinement. The only thing that he's allowed in his cell is a Bible. And with nothing else to do, he starts to read it. And as he reads it, he reads about a man so different to himself, a man not full of hatred, but full of love. And yet this man experienced hatred and execution for him. Sitting in that prison cell, Tom came to experience the forgiveness of the one who had experienced that for him. And that experience of forgiveness had such a radically transforming effect in Tom's life that from that moment on, he was a different man. In fact, the prison guards could see that he was a different man. He suddenly became this agent of change, even in the prison. Eventually, he was released. And if you were to meet him today, you would see that he is one of the most gentle, loving, gracious people you could imagine. Because his experience of the forgiveness of Jesus didn't give him a license to go back to his old life. But no, it was the freedom to now live a new life, set free. Last question. Is forgiveness automatic? If God offers forgiveness, does that mean we're all forgiven? If Jesus died on a cross for the world, as he did, then does that mean that's just automatically applied to us? Well, in a sense, there are two parts to forgiveness, aren't there? Forgiveness has to be offered, but if there's going to be reconciliation in a relationship, it also needs to be received. And the aim of God's forgiveness is that we can be reconciled and brought back into a friendship with God And the wonder is that God is willing to offer it to all of us. But the choice that we have to face, of course, is whether we're willing to receive it or not. But it's through receiving that forgiveness we can then enter into that relationship that's on offer. And I guess my question as we come to the end is, have you experienced that? Have you received that? And if you haven't, what would be maybe the things stopping you from receiving that? So as we come towards the end, I've asked Andy to sing one final song. And maybe this is a song just to reflect on what we've heard tonight and through this week so far. And to maybe ask ourselves the question, what our response is to what we've been hearing about this week. Thanks, Andy.
I wrote this in a bus station. People walking past, perhaps you were one of them. And as I was writing it, I was thinking about this theme we're sharing tonight. That there's a God who's there, and he loves, and he waits, and he calls. And he's come in the person of Jesus to invite us into relationship with him. And there's an ancient piece of poetry that says, today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. And that's the refrain of this song. Just call me today. Now you run for the bus, climb on, and you smile at a person you don't know and drive on. But today if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. Today if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. Now you're out in the street, walk on. The advertisements, well, read on. And today if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. Today if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. The basket plays, taps his feet, sweet song, but a reminder of what you want to forget, so move on. And today if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. Today if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. There's one who loves and who waits and who calls, and there's one who died to save your life. And is there life richer than this well? Think on. Place of real peace, well, think on. And today if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. Today if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. Today if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. Today if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart.
Thanks so much, Andy. Well, as I said, I wonder what our response to this is. What is stopping you, if you haven't already, receiving and experiencing that forgiveness, that fresh start? Maybe you're here tonight and say, well, actually what's stopping me is the fact that I'm still very skeptical about whether any of this is true. And if that's you, then we are really glad that you've come tonight. We're really glad that you've been willing to hear what we've got to say, even if maybe you're very skeptical and have a lot of questions about it. But if that is you as well, we'd really encourage you to check this out. Why not take away this Mark book that we've been looking at all week? As we've said before, there are some really good reasons for taking it seriously as a historical source. A number of other books on the bookstall deal with those kind of questions. But actually getting your nose into some of the first century evidence for yourself is a great place to start. It'll take you a couple of hours to read at most if you're a slow reader like me, and you're probably not. You're a much faster reader, so you're less than that. But why not check it out and say, well, if this is true, what would it mean for me? Maybe you're saying, well, I don't feel the need for forgiveness. I don't feel the need for a fresh start. Well, I guess the objective question is, if this is true, then God seems to think we need one because he went to great lengths to make it possible. So again, that question of whether this actually happened is really important to ask. Maybe you're saying, well, I'm not skeptical, but I've got a lot of questions and I'd love to find out more. And if that's you, then the good news is the OICCU exists to help people in your situation to find out more. And after this week of events, there's going to be a thing called The Search each week where you can continue to search and to ask questions and to look into it and to investigate further. And we'd love to help you to do that. We'd also want to say you don't have to wait until all of your questions have been answered, all of the I's have been dotted, and all of the T's have been crossed before you get to that point of experiencing forgiveness and stepping into this relationship with God. It can be experienced tonight. It can be experienced right now. And maybe tonight, as you've listened to what has been said, and as you've listened to the songs that have been sung and the poetry earlier, maybe for the first time, you've started to see something different about Jesus and why he died. Maybe it started to begin to make sense in your mind in a way that it hasn't before. It certainly did for that centurion, didn't it? Standing looking at Jesus as he was being crucified. This wasn't just another crucifixion. And he came to that amazing realization that this was God doing it for him. And if that's maybe what you're starting to realize, what do you do about it? Well, maybe talking to God would be a great thing to do in response. And maybe using 3 of the simplest words we learn when we're kids. What do we learn to say when we're kids? Sorry, thank you, and please. And we could say something like that to God, couldn't we? We could say to God, sorry. That's often the hardest word, isn't it? But we say sorry because the way to receiving forgiveness is, first of all, to recognize that we need it. In different ways, big and small, publicly known and perhaps more often unknown, we have blown it and we need a fresh start. We're sorry. Secondly, we say thank you. Thank you that you're willing, God, to forgive me despite all of that. And you've made it possible in the most incredible way for me to know that fresh start. And then please, God, will you forgive me and come into my life? And maybe there are some here tonight and you've not yet made that step, but that would be the sensible next step based on what you've come to realize. And so I'm just going to finish just with a short prayer that uses some of those words. And if you'd like to respond in that way, then just echo this in your heart as a way of talking to God. If you don't want to do that, if you're not there yet, that's totally fine. You can just listen. But just out of respect for those who are there, just give a moment for those who are to be able to respond if that's the way that they're wanting to do that. So maybe just a moment of quiet, just to reflect, and then I'll pray. If you want to echo it, then please do. God, I am sorry. I'm sorry for the way that I've hurt others. I'm sorry for the way that I've hurt you. I know I'm not the person I always should be. God, thank you that in spite of that, you love me. Thank you that through Jesus, you paid all that I deserve to pay so that I could be forgiven. God, please, will you forgive me and will you come into my life and help me to live with you from this moment onwards? And I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.